if someone asked me what block had the most influence over the rest of Magic, I would say the Ravnica block. So let's start by talking about Ravnica, City of Guilds.
On October 7, 2004, one of the most influential blocks in the history of Magic the Gathering would make its debut with the set Ravnica, City of Guilds. The whole block takes place on its namesake plane-wide Ecumenopolis, that is, a city so large that it spans the entire globe. Much of the power on Ravnica comes from the city plane's 10 guilds, each of which symbolize a different color pair within the game of Magic. 4 of those guilds are highlighted in the debut Ravnica set, as well as its similarly named accompanying novel by Corey J. Herndon. Before we get to talking about the set itself, here's a summary of the set's story. Argus Kos, an officer with the Boros Legion, and his lieutenant, Mixil Zunich, are investigating a group of killers from the cult of Vorthos, one of the 10 guilds on the plane-wide city of Ravnica. Things go awry during the investigation and, in short, Zunich meets an untimely end. Fast forward 57 years to the year 1999 on the Ravnica calendar, and the entire plane-spanning city is gearing up for the decamillennial celebration of the signing of the Guild Pact, an ancient and magical agreement between Ravnica's guilds that sets statutes and ordinances for each guild so that, in essence, they can all coexist more or less peacefully. Kos, however, has had anything but a peaceful life since the Vorthos investigation nearly 60 years prior. Now an old, bitter man who drinks too much, he has never come to terms with what happened to his fellow officer all those years ago. He begins to see what he thinks is a ghostly apparition of his long-since deceased comrade. While ghosts are a thing on Ravnica, they don't tend to stick around very long unless they have a contract with the Orzhov Syndicate, which, as far as Kos knows, Zunich lacks. At some point, Lieutenant Kos, along with his current partner, or as he would put it, the guy he works with, Bel Borka, follows this familiar phantom into an alley where a Rakdos goblin had just slain a girl from the very same orphanage where Kos was raised. He chases the murderous goblin to a nearby pub where, upon arrival, the goblin blows himself up, taking much of the establishment and a number of those on site along with him. This includes the lieutenant's partner and a prominent person from the Selesnya Conclave known as Living Saint Bayul. Kos awakens in the hospital, whereupon he learns that Bayul's bodyguard, whom is currently missing in action, was none other than Fawn Zunich, the daughter of his long-late partner. Fawn, it seems, was not injured in the blast. Indeed, she wasn't even on site when it happened, and she and her wolf mount, Berekazir, had beforehand been taken to a safe house by a Golgari hunter named Jared, who had been sent to fetch her by his sister, the Golgari High Priestess, Savra. Savra, however, only sent Jared on this errand as a setup. In league with an unknown third party, the Golgari Priestess had planned to have both Bayul and Jared slain in the blast. This mysterious person then directs Savra to visit Vorthos, the Restless Tomb, the location where the Golgari Paran, or leader, Svogthir, had been imprisoned ever since the Sisters of Stone Death usurped his power a century ago. Savra manages to free the imprisoned Paran, doing her best to keep the powerful necromancer under her control. Svogthir takes immediate revenge on the Gorgon sisters for his dethroning, slaying 2 of them before the third and final surrenders. The Golgari Paran's swift revenge complete, Savra then slays him and absorbs his power and status, thus becoming the guild's new ruler. Back with Argus Kos, the Boros lieutenant tries to leave the hospital and get back out in the field. His superior officer, however, disagrees, pointing out to him that he might not survive the healing magics necessary for him to do so, citing Kos' condition and advanced age. The two get into a heated argument over the issue and, in the end, Kos is slapped with a suspension. Soon after, the suspended lieutenant receives not 1, but 2 ghastly visits. First, again, from the ghost of Zunich, then from the recently departed Borka. Borka, it seems, has an Orzhov contract allowing him to haunt Kos until his death has been avenged. Borka reveals to his former and living partner that he was never at the pub where the explosion had occurred and was, instead, still in the alley where the orphan girl had been murdered and was actually slain there. Koz is then visited by Feather, an angelic member of the Vorthos who, as punishment for an unspecified sort of insubordination, had her wings bound and was forced to serve on foot amongst the guild's rank-and-file Wojek soldiers. She decides to assist Koz and provides him with the healing potions he needs to heal from his various wounds, then breaks him out of the hospital. Meanwhile, back with the Golgari, Savra sends a handful of harpies to find and kill Jared and Fawn. Luckily, Jared was ready, as he's had suspicions for some time now that his sister may act against him, and the two defeat their attackers. Fawn, however, is now wanted for questioning because of Borka's death, so she and Jared team up to figure out exactly what is going on. As they begin their investigation, however, they are attacked by more of the Golgari. Upon defeating them, Jared and Fawn discover that these Golgari zombies are nothing more than a bunch of shape-shifting worms. The two simultaneous investigations, that of Koz and Feather, as well as Jared and Fawn, soon merge as both parties find themselves at a fighting arena/restaurant owned by an Orzhov imp known as Pilvik. Seeing an interesting business opportunity, the imp sets Koz and Jared up in a fight against a Rakdos informant. Here, it's apparent that the Boros lieutenant is, at the very least, familiar with Jared. During the match, the informant spills some of the beans. He tells them that the suicide bomber goblin who attacked the pub was a slave brought to him by entities known as Quiet Men, ghostly servants of the Selesnian Guild. Immediately after that juicy tidbit becomes known, the venue's windows burst open and a good number of Quiet Men flood into the establishment, causing chaos and killing a number of the patrons and employees there. Koz, Feather, Jared, Fawn, and Pilvik all escape together and venture back to the Wojek headquarters, whereupon they get news that Bayol, the Selesnian thought slain during the pub blast, is still alive, though in a state of inactivity. Meanwhile, the Quiet Men begin to herd some of Ravnica's population towards Vitu-Ghazi, the seat of the Selesnya Conclave, as Golgari forces begin to take aggressive action against the Boros Legion in defiance with the nearly 10,000-year-old guild pact. Soon after, Koz and his party meet up with a dying Bayul. He informs them that there are only 3 non-dryads who make up the chorus of the Conclave, the Selesnian ruling body, and that he is one of those 3. He then tells them that the gem on his forehead is what connects the chorus's members together, but that he believes that Savra wants to take the gem and connect herself in with the rest so that she may attempt a takeover of the Selesnya. As he expires, he hands the gem over to Fawn. Immediately thereafter, the Boros soldiers standing guard attack them. As it turns out, they too are actually these worm-like shapeshifters, and were posing as members of the Boros Legion. Koz and crew manage their escape, but Fawn is soon after captured by Quiet Men and taken to Vitu-Ghazi. Koz removes the bonds holding down Feather's wings, and the angel flies off in pursuit. It's then discovered just how busy a person Savra has been. Not only has she been slowly poisoning the roots of Vitu-Ghazi, the city tree, but she has also been creating her own army of Quiet Men by killing Ravnican citizens and turning them into ghost warriors, mixing her Quiet Men in with those native to the Conclave. Their tree now beginning to suffer from an unknown to them ailment, the chorus of the Conclave solicit for assistance. Assistance that Savra is only too happy to provide in exchange for being able to join the chorus once a position opens up. At Vitu-Ghazi, and under the cover of the spectacle from the vast number of Quiet Men stirring up trouble, the Golgari Queen confronts Fawn, who is holding Bayul's gem. Savra rips off Fawn's hand and takes the gem for herself. She joins the chorus and becomes connected to their collective consciousness. Then the mysterious figure who had been in cahoots with Savra this whole time finally makes himself known. Stepping out from the shadows, he reveals himself to be Sadek, leader of the Demir, a secretive guild that many on the plane thought was nothing more than a myth. He approaches Savra and praises her, calling her his liberator. He then snaps her neck, killing her, along with all of the dryads of the chorus with whom she was now sharing a consciousness. Zazek then takes control of the imposter Quiet Men and has them tear a hole in the Vitu-Ghazi, revealing Mat Selesnya, the Conclave's Parun, who powers the magic of the Guild Pact. Ever the vampire, the Demir leader begins to feed on her. It's at about this point that Koz, Jared, and the rest arrive on scene. Jared grabs his late sister's staff and uses its power to take control over Zazek's worm-like shapeshifters, And this includes the ghost-like apparition of Zunich that Koz has been seeing lately. He instructs the shapeshifters to attack Zadok, and they do an extremely good job of things, nearly tearing the vampire to pieces. Fawn, meanwhile, reclaims Bayou's jewel, placing it on Birakazir, the wolf having been injured in battle. This new connection breathes new life into the chorus as Matsalesnia begins to radiate with new energy. An energy wave bursts from her, disintegrating the shapeshifters and frying what's left of Zadok, leaving the vampire little more than a burnt skeleton. Koz, ever the law enforcement officer, places the charred skeletal remains under arrest. It's now the next day. The Boros are considering Zadok to have been dealt with. Jared has assumed control of the Golgari as the new guildmaster. Belborka has moved on in death. His Orzhov contract satisfied now that his demise has been avenged. Koz retires. He joins the imp, Pilvik, and moves to an area known as a reclamation zone. Before he departs, however, he feels the obligation to inform Fawn exactly how her father, his late partner, perished some 57 years prior. He tells her how the two of them were in pursuit of a Rakdos priestess, but that there was also another on her tail, a Golgari bounty hunter known as Jared von Savo. Having tracked the priestess up to a rooftop, Zunich located her and went in for the attack. Rather than slaying the priestess, however, the officer had instead killed an innocent girl whom Jared was using as bait so that he may capture the priestess himself. Guilt-ridden and enraged, Zunich then attacked Jared with intent to kill. Koz tried to intervene and, in the scuffle that followed, Zunich slipped, falling off of the roof and to his death. Meanwhile, in one of Ravnica's morgues, the coroner, Helligan, prepares to cremate the body of the little orphan girl who had been found slain in the alley near the pub a few days prior. While Helligan's attention was away from the corpse, it morphs into a worm-like entity, killing the coroner and taking his place and his face. And that's where the story ends. Well, for now anyhow, but there's still much more to tell about the set itself.
And I'll help tell it.
Ravnica City of Guilds had an all-star lineup of designers and developers behind it. On the design side, Mark Rosewater took lead of a team that included Mike Elliott, Aaron Forsyth, Tyler Bielman, and Magic creator Richard Garfield.
He, at the time, wasn't doing a lot of Magic. He was doing a lot of other projects. But every once in a while, I would go say, Richard, come on, do you want to do another Magic set? And he'd go, oh, sure. I was excited for Ravnica. I thought it was a cool idea. And so Richard said he was game. And so I was really happy to have Richard on. That was a special treat. Mike Elliott at the time was probably the second most prolific designer after me. Once we started making stuff inside the building, Mike and I led the vast majority of the sets. Aaron Forsyth was an up-and-comer at the time. He was somebody who I think I was grooming to take my position at some point, and he ended up doing his own thing, and now he's the VP of design. And then Tyler Bielman, who was someone who was running the creative team at the time. We wanted a lot of interconnectivity between what the creative was doing and what the set was doing.
Development featured Brian Schneider as the lead and employed the talents of Mark Gottlieb, Henry Stern, Forsyth, and others.
That was relatively early on for Aaron.
Ravnica City of Guilds was not the first Magic set to be created with an intense focus on multicolored themes. That honor belongs to Invasion, which released 4 years prior. With that in mind, Ravnica's designers had to find a way to make this new set stand apart from those of the Invasion block.
Invasion was all about playing as many colors as you could. So I'm like, okay, what's the opposite end of that spectrum? To be a gold set, it had to at least be 2 colors. So like, okay, what if it's all about playing 2 colors? Rather than playing 4 or 5 colors, like Invasion, what if it was about playing 2 colors?
Thankfully for Wizards, the Invasion block provided some lessons learned when it came to creating multicolor focused sets.
One of the big lessons we learned from Invasion was one of the problems when you play a lot of colors is what we call sort of mana soup problems, right? Where if I make it easy to play 5 colors, well, why aren't you just playing the best cards? So one of the reasons we were looking to sort of go at the other end of the spectrum, besides differentiating ourselves from Invasion, was also, we still wanted to make sure that the color palette mattered in a key way. And what we ended up doing, what ended up being kind of the biggest charm of Ravnica is something that actually Brady Domerith, who was the creative director at the time, he came back with the idea of guilds in a city. And then once I heard that, I'm like, I'm all in. That sounds awesome.
In the end, Ravnica set the standard for how such an endeavor should be executed from here on out. The 10 two-colored guilds represented on Ravnica were split between the Ravnica Block's 3 sets, with 4 being featured in City of Guilds, with the outstanding 6 being split between the 2 sets that followed. The militaristic red-white Vorthos.
Vorthos takes the drive of red and the desire to protect of white. And together, it becomes the military group that is constantly looking out for those around it. But it's going to do whatever it takes to get there.
Shady blue-black Dimir.
It was very fun to have a guild to play into just the manipulation of when blue and black get together.
Necromantic black-green Golgari.
It's very focused on the graveyard and on how everything that is dead can be used again.
And selfless green-white Selesnya.
It's the guild that says strength comes in numbers, that no one individual is what makes things strong, it's the whole of us. And so it is the guild that cares the most about the needs of the group.
With the debut of these two-color guilds came the introduction of a new thing known as hybrid mana symbols. These symbols are circles that are halved diagonally with one mana color and a miniature symbol on one half and a different one on the other. These mana symbols mean that mana of either color may be used towards casting the spell, such as with the uncommon creature Boros Guildmage having a red-white hybrid mana cost, allowing the card to be played by paying 2 white, 2 red, or 1 of each color of mana. In fact, all of the Guildmage creatures in the set, as well as the block as a whole, featured hybrid mana, along with a good number of other guild-affiliated cards throughout the block.
Hybrid mana came about because I was experimenting, and we were playing with color, and I was just trying to find different ways to play with color. And one of the ideas I was very fascinated by was when you look at a traditional gold card, it's an and. A red and green gold card is red and green. And I was fascinated by the idea of ore. I love the idea of what did ore mean? Like there's a lot of overlap in colors. Like, while colors do different things, there are overlaps in colors. And so the idea was, what if we could tap into that overlap space? And so I came up with this idea and I adored it. I was really happy with it. And then I started showing it around and people were like, yeah, so? And I'm like, no, it's not and, it's or. And they're like, okay, so? I think it wasn't until I started doing designs with it that I think people started to warm up to it. And it's funny, years later, looking back at Ravnica, one of the biggest things Ravnica did was introduce the tool of hybrid mana. Hybrid mana has become a very useful tool. We use it in all sorts of places.
Each guild also had its own new keyword or ability word affiliated with it. For Ravnica's 4 guilds, that would be Radiance for the Boros Guild, which is an ability word that appears on spells and abilities that affect every permanent that shares a color with the targeted permanent, such as with the card Rally the Righteousness, allowing its caster to untap a target creature and each other creature that shares a color with it, granting those creatures a +2/+0 boost as well. Convoke for Selesnya, which is an ability that allows players to tap their creatures to help pay the mana cost for specific spells. Attach Them Worm, a 9/14 trampler that costs a whopping 10 plus 3 green and 2 white, for example, has Convoke to help players cast it at a reduced cost. Dredge for Golgari. Cards with Dredge may be returned from the graveyard to their owner's hand in exchange for the player skipping their draw phase and milling a certain number of cards from their own deck. Graveshell Scarab, for instance, can be returned to its owner's hand from the graveyard at a cost of Dredge 1, meaning that only 1 card needs to be milled in order to take advantage of the ability. And Transmute for the Dimir Guild. With Transmute, a player may pay the card's Transmute cost, discarding the card in the process, and look through their library for any card with the same mana cost as the discarded card. The player then puts that card into their hand, revealing it to all players in the process. Dimir Infiltrator, a 2-costed creature for example, can be transmuted to search one's own library for any other card that costs 2 mana.
One of the ideas when we had the concept of sort of doing the factioning, of making the guilds, was let's give each guild its own keyword. At the time, we really hadn't done factioning by keyword. That was kind of, Ravnica really introduced that as a concept. Each mechanic was designed by a different member of the team. Radiance was created by Mike Elliott. Convoke was made by Richard Garfield. Transmute was made by Aaron Forsyth. And I made Dredge.
Typically, Magic sets have a wide variety of cycles. That is, a collection of cards, typically spread amongst the colors, that all share a common theme or relationship. With Ravnica City of Guilds, not so much, as there were only 2 in the entire set. Or as with come-into-play effects, such as Faith's Fetters netting its caster 4 life when it enters the battlefield, and Hunted Creatures, all of which have better than average power and toughness for their casting cost, but cause 1 or more token creatures to also come into play under an opponent's control as a means of balancing the threat. Despite the lack of self-contained cycles, Ravnica City of Guilds did kick off a wide series of block-spanning 10-card mega cycles. This includes the various guild mages, guild champions such as Tulsmer Wolfblood and Argus Koz, Wojek Veteran, guild masters like Sisters of Stone Death, and Sadek, Lord of Secrets, the various mana-producing and converting signets such as the Dimir and Selesnya signet, bounce lands like Selesnya Sanctuary and Boros Garrison, guild halls such as Duskmantle, House of Shadow, and Sunhome, Fortress of the Legion, and, most notably, the Shock Lands, a series of dual lands that are so called because if a player wants them to come into play untapped, they have to take 2 damage, which is the same amount of damage that the spell Shock deals.
Interestingly, I designed the Shock lands, and so here was my thought process. I mean, power level's never my thing, so I didn't know how good or bad they were. I was just trying to make it interesting, and so in Invasion, we had made the tap dual lands, and we also had the pain lands that had been very popular at the time in like Ice Age and stuff. And so what I was trying to do was make a cross between a tapped land and a pain land. So instead of every time you tap it, you take damage. Well, what if just up front you have to pay some amount of life to have it untapped? When I first made them, there was a little bit of worry that it was too complicated. And I was like, well, no, I mean, like, it's easy to grok. Like, either you put them in tapped or not, and there's a cost for not. And eventually people came around, but it was one of the things that I had to sort of convince people that it wasn't as complicated as it looked like at first blush.
Before moving on to the set's noteworthy new cards, there's a nice assortment of reprints that are included in Ravnica City of Guilds that are worth a mention. Birds of Paradise, which was first printed in Alpha but hadn't seen print since 8th edition. Dark Heart of the Woods and Elves of Deep Shadow, 2 underappreciated cards from the Dark that make a surprise appearance in the set, and, technically, the new cards Char and Reign of Embers, which are color-shifted functional reprints of the cards Psionic Blast from Alpha and Dry Spell from Homelands. And Ravnica City of Guilds was not lacking in terms of new original cards that had made an impact one way or another. First off, of course, there are the set's 4 Shocklands: Overgrown Tomb, Sacred Foundry, Temple Garden, and Watery Grave. All of these cards are must-includes for pretty much any deck that runs these colors in pretty much every format they're legal in. There's also the cards Life from the Loam, Stinkweed Imp, Golgari Thug, and Golgari Grave Troll, which are all important cards for dredge-based strategies. And that final card, the Grave Troll, has proven to be such a strong graveyard enabler that it was initially banned in Modern when the format was created, only to be later unbanned before, 2 years later, being banned again for the exact same reason it was banned in the first place. There's also Lightning Helix, a card that is essentially a lightning bolt and a healing salve stapled together. It made its debut in the original Ravnica and is a must-include in many competitive Boros burn decks. Chord of Calling has proven to be a reliable and competitive creature tutor that has found popularity in Modern. And yet another card that has found its way into many competitive Magic decks is the black card drawing engine Dark Confidant. Nicknamed Bob, the card is actually designed and bears a likeness of Robert Bob Marr Jr., for him winning the 2003-04 Magic the Gathering Invitational.
Bob had submitted some other card, but he wasn't happy with it. We weren't happy with it. So what I said to Bob was, hey, describe what you want and I will help you with it. And so Bob said what he wanted was he wanted a really cheap card in black, a cheap black creature that had a lot of card advantage to it. And so I remember I was at some Pro Tour that Bob was at, because I at the time I ran the feature matches and stuff. And like in between stuff, I would work on things that I would show it off to Bob, and Bob would give me notes. We went back and forth till we finally got something that like Bob was really happy with, which was what ended up being the printed card.
Other cards of note include the Token and Counter Multiplier Doubling Season, the combo enabling Cloudstone Curio, which has found a home in various EDH decks, the hexproof enabling privileged position, Glimpse the Unthinkable, a powerful and efficient card that mills 10 cards at the cost of just 2 mana. Remand, a delay tactic counterspell that replaces itself via card draw. And Muddle the Mixture, a common counterspell that is more often used for its transmute ability. As a pre-release promo, Wizards of the Coast gave out an alternate art Glean Crawler, a splashy card that never really saw that much play in the grand scheme of things. And as the set's release promo, players were presented with a Dimir Guildmage, which feels like a bit of an odd choice seeing as it's one in a cycle of Guildmages. And one final bit of trivia for you. The set Ravnica City of Guilds wasn't originally called that. In fact, once it was out of codename status, the codenames for the Block's 3 sets, by the way, were Control, Alt, and Delete, it was simply titled Ravnica. The, quote, City of Guilds moniker was added fairly late on as they emphasized the set's, and really the whole block's, emphasis on the 2 colored guilds. Oddly enough, the decision was made while Rosewater and Brady Dommermuth, the person who came up with the idea of the guilds, were each independently on vacation, much to their chagrin upon their returns.
We thought the idea of what the guilds were was just radiated through the whole product. But there are other people in the building that were a little more nervous about it. And they I think we had actually done playtesting where we send it out and the playtest team were like, we have no idea what's going on. We only see 4 color combinations. Where are the rest? And they sort of didn't get it. And so they came back to us and said, we're worried that people aren't going to get the guilds. And Brady and I were like, it's oozing through the product. There's no way you can miss it. I guarantee the audience will get it. But anyway, I go on vacation. And while I'm on vacation, they decide to add Ravnica, City of Guilds. Because they were just so worried people weren't going to get it. So they added that on. And when I came back, I'm like, okay, guys, I'm like, fine, whatever. But when the set came out, the audience obviously got it. Yeah, that was done when I wasn't there.
So is Ravnica City of Guilds among your favorite Magic the Gathering sets? If so, let us know your thoughts in the comments section here on YouTube. Also, please subscribe to Magic Untapped on YouTube and pop a buck in our Patreon tip jar to support more great Magic the Gathering content. Finally, one huge shout out to Mark Rosewater. Thank you for taking part in this Magic History video.